My name is Evelyn Chow. I am a rising sophomore at Rhode, Rhode Island School of Design. I'm entering into a graphic design major, and throughout my life, I've been doing art since I was very young. I've been interested in a lot of different subjects, mainly focused on biology, and that's what I've been incorporating into my art throughout the years.
Can you please explain your style?
So I would say I have a few different styles. The most consistent one I would say is my digital style when it comes to my digital illustrations. I like using a lot of textured brushwork and layering brushstrokes. I like using a lot of different colors, playing with colors that might not necessarily fit in the original hue of the object. I would say my style sometimes leans a lot more towards more graphic, depending on what I'm depicting. But I would say compared to a lot of other people, I think my style isn't necessarily as consistent because I feel like every time I want to try something different. And I also think that with each piece, it comes with its unique character, so that when you try to make something too similar stylistically, it can't communicate the expression or what you're trying to express through the art piece as well.
Are there any particular forms of ways to express or ideas that you're trying to achieve?
I think my ideas, half of them I would say focus on narrative. So this includes drawing from my own experiences and using those as inspiration for my artworks, or drawing on common social phenomena, such as I like to use satire a lot in my pieces to critique social phenomena, political polarization, or certain ways me or other people view the world. And so I would say the first category is like kind of commentary. It can also be about my own life. For example, how I face isolation or loneliness and how I relate to others in a social context. So that's the first category. And then the second category, I would say draws more on nature and biological phenomena. So this category I would say is more abstract. And through this, what I like to focus on is a very close observation of patterns found in nature, and then using the patterns in an abstract way to create an artwork in itself. So I made a series in my first semester, my final at RISD for my drawing class. I made a series of cell division pieces where it was abstract patterns on sheets of paper that had different patterns depending on which cycle, which phase the cell was in. So that piece did not really have any like deeper meaning to it. It was simply an appreciation of the beauty of a natural process that isn't always thought about, but happens everywhere.
I really like the fact that you have both sides of your art, whether it's deep, thoughtful, or just depicting what you want to depict. So it actually leads to my next question. I'm thinking, so when you're seeing a piece of work and when deciding whether this piece of art is good or not, or how good it is, do you judge it based on the visual effects it brings more, or the meanings behind it more?
I think that's something that actually has changed a lot since I came to RISD. I feel like after coming to RISD, learning about different art movements, it's kind of led me to appreciate art in a different sense. So I would say I would define a successful art piece as one that is able to clearly communicate what it wants to the audience and cause them to feel a certain way. So that could be happy, fear, anger, etc., depending on what the artist is trying to convey. So I think visuals and meaning both tie into that. So I would say though that a lot of people think about, oh, the meaning behind the art. It's really complex, a backstory. But the thing is, if the viewer can't see that or understand that when viewing the artwork, then I feel like it diminishes the impact of the work. So I would say a lot of it rests on the visuals because we have kind of an instinctual way to view things. If we see something that's red, for example, it could remind us of blood or anger. So there's these more basic, I would say primal, human, like the way that we perceive things that overrides, oh, this is about this person's past and whatever. So I think, in a way, I think the visuals can be more important than the meaning. And adding on to that, I think not all pieces have to have a really deep meaning or backstory behind them. Something can just look good and just be just visually appealing to the eye, and I think that can be obviously pretty subjective, but I think that just because it's appealing, it could be a successful piece of art.
Should a piece of art be good because it can be sold, or should it be good because it connects more to the artist?
I think personally, I would say the latter. I would say the importance of art lies not in its marketability or its worth in terms of money, but in terms of how it can affect people. For example, I can't think of a specific example, but an artwork that can change millions of people's point of view on a certain subject and inspires change in the world that lets people improve themselves. I think that has a greater impact than it selling for X million amount of dollars. And I think there is a lot of debate about like contemporary art where there's not a lot of skill put into them, as a lot of people assume. For example, like Mark Rothko, his abstract paintings, people are like, oh, I could do that. A 5-year-old could do that. And it sells for millions and millions of dollars. And I think a lot of people, well, my personal opinion is that while I think it is a valid piece of art, even though it looks really easy, even though like people think, oh, a 5-year-old can make that, I think the way that the impact it gives you, especially when you view something at a scale in person, I think makes it like a worthy piece of art. I think it's selling for extreme amounts of money is a different story that
What do you think?
personally don't have as much experience in, like fine art selling works and stuff. I do think that it can seem a little ridiculous, and I think it's fair if people do argue that it is being overpriced.
I have two questions about the standard of a good art. And so, as you were saying, it has to like kind of let the viewers know what they're trying to say, whether it's through the visuals or the things they use. But do you think that the general public doesn't have the ability to understand most of the time? But for a lot of works, their depth couldn't be fully discovered by people, general people. So, what do you think about the hidden aspect of artworks?
So when you mean it isn't discoverable by general people, is that due to, for example, a lack of education or?
I'm sorry, I'm not being clear, but it's like a lot of works needs the viewers to have some ability to appreciate it. And most of the time, people just look at it and don't understand what it means. It doesn't mean that it's not a good artwork. It might just because the viewer doesn't have the ability to view them. What do you think? If for most people, they don't understand it, but it might be some really profound view. And
I think that can depend. So if it's like a poorly made, a poorly communicated piece of art, I think basically it's like, I'm thinking of a way to explain it, but say if it's a bad art piece, then I would say it's more like people are guessing what it means, and like most people guess it incorrectly, but some people just happen to guess it correctly. Whereas if it's a good piece of art that only a few people understand, I would say it's Like one example I would think of is a very specific experience that maybe you had when you're growing up, that it's like, if you haven't had that experience, then you cannot really understand it. And in that case, the majority of people understanding it the majority of people not understanding it is intentional by the artist, because the artist is aiming their demographic towards people who would understand it. So I would say what makes it good, like, depends on where the artist is aiming the piece towards.
So there is often a lot of room for interpretation for a lot of works. So does that mean that it didn't achieve the intended theme or thing they want to express through that work?
Yeah, so I think having multiple interpretations of a piece isn't necessarily a bad thing. People can take away their own conclusions, and I would say the measure of success behind that would be how much people feel connected to their own interpretation of the work.
But it doesn't necessarily is what the artist is intentionally doing.
I think in that case, I would say, even if it is misinterpreted, I guess that would be up to the artist to determine. There's multiple measures of success of a piece, kind of the audience reception. So if they misinterpret it and they like it, then I guess it is up to the artist to say. So if the artist is like, no, I miscommunicated it, it's unsuccessful, then it would be unsuccessful.
I have a yes or no question. Is there a good standard for art?
A good standard.
Or some kind of standard for art?
And answering that with a yes or no, I would say there are definitely standards.
But who's there to make the standard?
You see, the market is forming the standards, and
Yes.
if you're just thinking, and you're thinking that art is good because the market says it's good, then is it actually good? Then what is your standard for a good piece of art, and does it differ from the market? And if it is the same as the market, are you just following the trend, or do you actually thought about what kind of art is actually good in your mind?
So the question is my standards versus the market standards? Or
Sort of.
yeah, okay. Let me think about that. So yeah, as I've said, there are standards for art. I would say people find certain things more attractive. And also this obviously changes with time period. Things go in and out of fashion. And I think in that term, there is a standard, although I would say that can differ from personal taste. And can you repeat the question again?
Let's ask his question first. So who do you think is shaping all the standards?
So I think the market, people in power, people in education, because there's often, sometimes, not always, there is, I would say probably often, there is a right or wrong in terms of what people teach. And then I would say, I'm thinking of maybe social media. There's certain types of things that tend to get more likes. So those are shaped by just whoever views the work, not necessarily people in power, but they're basically judging the works based on liking the posts, sharing the post, etc.
So it's like a multifaceted thing. There are people who make an academy or something like that, who really sets the standards. For example, they study the composition or the color wheel or whatever. They have a standard, but also it's up to the general public. Their views matter as well. They shape the standard for good art in our generation together. Is that?
But don't you think the expensive works are all bought by the ones in power? So do you think it's actually shaped more by the ones in power than the actual general?
Well, I think there's a lot of different types of art. For example, it could be you think of fine artists in museums, and then you think of the artists that are on social media, they do taking commissions and stuff.
Contemporary arts that are in galleries.
Contemporary, that's what we're talking about. So in that case, then I would say it would be a lot of people in power, in education.
So do you think it would be the right thing to do for us to follow the trend of the rich people, like the people in power, for us to listen to their thoughts and decide whether a piece of art is actually good or not?
Well, I think not necessarily. I think people can be, making their own choices, but a lot of people don't have the power to change it. Like if you're not a professor at an institution, then you can't kind of like convey your point of view.
What's your point of view?
My point of view, I would say, I think most of what is taught, at least as a rising second year at RISD, I do agree with most of what my professors have taught. I know a lot of people who haven't. For example, there's certain professors that teach you to have a very specific drawing style that a lot of people feel like don't really mesh with their art. And what I would say to that is I feel like, at least from like a student's perspective, that there can be takeaways from each professor or each artwork that you encounter that you can use in your own work. So it is up to you to choose which parts of what you see or learn that you absorb and use in your own work.
We're going to move on from this process of me digging you on your opinion on modern art. Now I'm going to talk about you, or ask about you. So why did you choose to do illustrations?
So I think, I would say just going very far back. Like as a kid, I drew a lot. My friends also drew a lot. It was mostly fan art from games, from anime, stuff like that. And I think it was also very accessible because all you really need is pencil, paper, some markers if you're really feeling fancy. And I think there's a lot of flexibility in what illustration can do. You can make something just because it looks really cool or really pretty. You can make something that's more of a narrative. You can make something that's sequential, like comics, graphic novels. And I would say I was inspired by just like a lot of other illustrators for games, like movie concept art, stuff like that.
Do you think it's normal in art for when creating a piece of art to copy?
To copy?
Do you think copy is a normal thing in art, or is it?
Okay, yeah. So I think to an extent, yes. That's how we learn. We can't develop things. Well, it's very hard to develop things in a vacuum. So to an extent, we do have to take inspiration from other pre-existing artists, and that is something that is pretty actively encouraged throughout the art world. So I would say the ethical way to do it is to sample different aspects from multiple artists. So for example, you take like the shading style from one artist, maybe the color usage from another artist, the way that this artist draws eyes, and then you combine them together to create your own style. So I would say, and even when you're doing studies, I think it is completely okay to copy or even trace, as long as it's a study, and if you're like posting it online, you credit the original artist. But I think where it becomes unethical in the copying is if you're basically tracing the whole piece, making minimal changes, and not making any reference to the original artist, then that would be a problem.
What is your plan for the future of your career?
The future, I think, so I am primarily an illustrator going into graphic design. The reason I chose that instead of majoring in illustration was mainly because of what I wanted to do as a career. Because I think a lot of people are like, oh, you have a better chance of getting a job if you go into graphic design. And I can't really dispute that. But I think the main reason I chose GD instead was because I feel like illustration is kind of my passion. It's my hobby. And if I were to do it as a full-time job, I feel like it could affect my passion for my craft and result in burnout, loss of motivation. So I think in terms of graphic design, what I am interested in, there's a lot of things I'm interested in, but I would say things that involve interaction with people, things that are in motions, motion graphics, like video related, or even it's a very broad field and I haven't explored much of it. So I'm hoping over the next few years to do so. And then after I graduate, I hope to work basically in-house or as a firm rather than freelance, hopefully.
As high school students ourselves, we really want to find out what it's like to find a job. What's the actual conditions and market of finding a job for an artist like you in the future, and how do you think it's going to develop into the near future as AI comes in more and more?
So I know a lot of people are very worried about AI and how they're going to take over artists' jobs. So I think with my experience so far, searching for art-related jobs, and from what I hear from upperclassmen, a lot of it is about like putting yourself out there and making the connections. I think that applies to a lot of industries, but for art especially, I think if you're able to land yourself in an institution like RISD, then you're going to have professors that work in the field. You're going to have a lot of resources and connections. You can ask your upperclassmen for advice. So I would say it starts small. I would say the first year, it's very rare for people to get internships just because foundation year is kind of like a general thing. So you don't get any major specific courses. And then starting second year, you start looking for smaller internships at small startups, just like smaller organizations. Sometimes they might even be unpaid. But at that point, if you're able to, you should still, in my opinion, do it just to get the experience. You add it in your portfolio, you add it in your resume. So that can still be really helpful. And then the summer of your third year is basically where you have to lock in. We have people at RISD interning at Apple, at Google, Riot Games, possibly, I think NASA as well. So that's kind of where it opens up. But it really is up to you. You have to be very motivated and actively reach out. And onto the topic of AI, I do think from what we've seen a lot that it is definitely replacing a lot of opportunities for artists, but I think that artists should be learning it as a tool because I think AI is a tool and I've tried using it before and I think it does take a little bit of a learning curve to get prompts right and I haven't delve deep into it, but like when you apply to jobs now, a lot of design jobs require you to have some experience working with AI. So I think in the future, it will just get integrated into part of the workflow. I remember seeing, there was an ad, I think, where the storyboarders used AI to make the storyboards for an ad. And then people got really mad about it, but the reality was that they didn't replace anyone with the AI. So it was like, rather than the storyboarders having to physically draw out whatever and render it, building 3D models for a storyboard or whatever, it was just using AI as a reference for the storyboard. And then the whole 3D team still had to rebuild the assets in from the AI reference into 3D models that could be animated and then made into the actual ad. So I think hopefully the market will get stabilized. I hear that there's also some legislation that is being put in place, but because AI is developing quickly, then I think that I'm not sure if they can keep up with it, but I also think the kind of ubiquitousness of AI can push people to work in more unconventional methods, maybe returning to more traditional handmade work. So I think that ultimately, I think AI is a tool. I think it, in a lot of parts, in a lot of instances, it is used poorly and can drag down kind of the company's vision. But I think, unfortunately, that it is something that people need to learn.
That is a very thorough explanation of yours. Thank you so much. That was my last question.
Thank
Okay.
you.
We're done.